Roger, in previous interviews, you've talked about the 1609 sonnet philosophy being the basis for all the plays of the 1623 Folio. I've read Harold Bloom's book, The Western Canon, in which he puts Shakespeare at the head of the canon, and he even goes so far as to say that his favourite characters are Hamlet and Falstaff. What do you think?
We have spent a bit of time going through the sonnet philosophy and then ending up in the 1623 Folio. We've considered parts of the introduction. I've also seen that there are 14 comedies, 10 histories and 12 tragedies, and there seems to be some real purpose about that, with females leading the comedies and with 3 males also taking a lead in some of the comedies. And then the 10 histories and 12 tragedies look at the murder and mayhem consequent upon church, state, male-based thinking and mind-based prejudices. So when Harold Bloom says that Shakespeare is the head of the canon, well, that's pretty major, really, because here we have an author, a playwright, a poet, being placed at the head of the Western canon. And the reception history of Shakespeare indicates, in fact, that he is the head of the canon, that, in fact, if anything, he could even have some wider influence because the Globe Theatre is in Japan. So even in the Eastern canon, for instance, he has some significance. So why is it that Harold Bloom would want to think that Shakespeare is the head of the Western canon? And yet, in my terms, when I read his books, he has no idea at all that Shakespeare has a philosophy, that the 1609 sonnet philosophy, the nature-based philosophy, is the philosophy behind all his plays. Instead, what we find, if I just go to one of the comments from Bloom, is that instead of appreciating Shakespeare's critique of Hamlet and Falstaff, Bloom dismisses Petruchio for exhibiting paranoid mania and calls Vincentio peculiar, anarchistic, sanctimonious, equivocal, lustful, half-crazed, wayward, a savage reductionist, manipulative, and blandly idiotic. Now here's someone, one of the highly recognised, supposedly Shakespeare scholars in the world, saying of these characters, Vincentio and Petruchio, who Shakespeare seems to give proto-playwright roles to, and they successfully see out the end of their plays, dismissing them as stupid and idiotic. So one has to think, in fact, that it is around the other way, that in fact Bloom is self-identifying himself with Hamlet, and who died in his plays because of his inability to resolve the issues in his plays, and not Falstaff, who is a bland idiot. So if Bloom has a predilection towards someone like Falstaff, it's a real statement about the status of Shakespeare's scholarship in the international scene and in the tertiary. So what we find instead, of course, is that if we look at the plays from the vantage of the sonnet philosophy, then all these issues fall away. And we have a capacity to use the philosophy to have an overview of the plays. We have an overview of Shakespeare's plays, therefore we have an overview of much else besides, of pretty much all of Western philosophy, all of Western poetry, all of Western drama, and pretty much all of Western politics, because all his plays deal with politics in one form or another. So we have to go a long, long way from Bloom, a long, long way further than Bloom, to begin to see what Shakespeare's on about.
So, Roger, you claim that all the plays are based in the sonnet philosophy. So when you're looking at the 1623 Folio, as if from the outside looking in, what do you see?
I first read the sonnets in 1994 in Wanganui, and I was really stunned by what I was seeing, and that seemed to be like a major philosophy in a set of sonnets. So it took me a while to unpackage it. It took me also a while to get to start reading the plays. And also, quite significantly, it took me a while to get hold of a copy of the original 1623 Folio in facsimile, which we did in the late 1990s, and it made a huge difference in terms of being able to see what was happening. Then over the last number of years, as we prepared 800,000-word commentary around all the plays, a bubble-type commentary around all the original facsimile, I've looked at every play in great detail, the 36 plays, the whole set of plays in the 1623 Folio, and I've just been stunned by their brilliance and by finding things in the plays that commentators are diffident about, angry about, change out, or do these other things too. And every so often I'd come across a passage or something that just seemed to be as if Shakespeare was injecting into the plays a more significant aspect of his philosophy. And it goes through all the plays, every play, right from The Tempest all the way through to Cymbeline at the end, has these elements in them. They're characters, they're clowns, there's other bits and pieces of characters. So if we go, for instance, to As You Like It, where there's a character called Touchstone, And he's in conversation with the shepherd, and the shepherd is telling him about his life and how he enjoys life, etc., and being on the land. And he says, well, you're a natural philosopher. So here's Shakespeare having his character Touchstone identify one of the characters in the play as a natural philosopher, which is what Shakespeare is, of course. And the joke in the As You Like It is that the character that is lionised in As You Like It is Jakes, but he's an idiot. He's an idiot who gives the 7 ages a man speak. And in the end, he goes off with the Duke's murderous brother to a monastery, it is secluded in a monastery, and so that's the fate of Jakes, whereas Touchstone goes out of the play as a hero, effectively. And if we look, for instance, at The Merchant of Venice, and we look at Portia's song, the song that Portia gets, I think, her maid to sing for Bassanio to choose the right casket. And what we find is that even though she's not allowed to tell him which casket to choose, the lead, the gold, or the silver, she puts words into the song like lead and beat and things like that, which have a rhyme with lead. And so she used subliminal messaging to get through to Bassanio, and in fact he chooses the lead casket. Well, surprise, surprise. But that idea of subliminal messaging is huge in Shakespeare. It's what he does all the time in all his plays. And so we had a diagram of the plays on stage last time where you have the plays on stage jetting their meaning through to the back of people's brains. And it's that subliminal messaging that makes Shakespeare's work so amazing, but also so opaque to anyone who's got a prejudice or a different point of view and wants to change the plays out, for instance. So their front of mind confusion both prevents them from seeing what is happening in the plays or seeing the philosophy, but at the same time they sense it because he's appealing to their natural logic through the subliminal messaging. And for instance, if we go to King John, we'll go to another play, the first of the history plays, and there's a fictional character called Philip Falconbridge, who's this bastard brother of King John. Now, King John has usurped the throne from, I think it's his nephew. And so here's Philip Falconbridge, and he critiques his brother, his supposed brother, his putative brother throughout the play. And then if we go to something like the Henry IV and Henry V plays, there's a character called Pistol. And the innkeeper, the woman who runs the inn, slates him as being a swaggerer. Now, a swaggerer in those terms is a non-believer. So here's Shakespeare putting into his play a person who's a non-believer amongst all these historic characters. And at the end of Henry V, which is a couple of plays later, he leaves Henry in France. Henry's on a mission to conquer France and goes back and says, I'd rather be a pick purse or even spend time with whores than be with Henry in France, because he knows, as Shakespeare knows, as the bishops advised Henry right at the beginning of his play, that he should create a diversion, because otherwise he will be held accountable for his father, Henry IV, murdering Richard II. And so Henry invents this idea of going to France and fighting in France. And so if we go to, for instance, to the two tragedies, the tragedy of King Lear and the tragedy of Othello, what we find in those two plays is that the two heroes, the two heroines, the two female leads, Desdemona and Cordelia, are told by their parents to marry somebody who they are unwilling to marry. And so they said no, and also to give their complete love to their father, unconditional love to their father. And both of them tell their fathers, no, we can only give you half our love because we owe half our love to our husbands. And there's Shakespeare in injecting the increase argument into some tragedies.
Well, there's rapid fire stuff, Roger. Are there any other examples?
Well, there's plenty of examples of, for instance, if I think of Love and Labour's Lost. Now, that's a play seemingly completely of Shakespeare's own devising. Most of the other plays in various forms. He gets the information from history, he gets the ideas from literature or from mythologies, for instance. But Love's Labour's Lost seems to be a play of his own devising, in which he has 4 females from France completely turn around the monastic, God-based expectations of 4 lords. And of course, towards the end of the play, they all evince their love for the females, but they put them through a period of privation to pay for their misplaced expectations. And so here you have a play in which 4 females are in charge of the play. And if we go to, for instance, back to King Lear, we see that Edmund, who is the bastard son of Lear, he talks about nature and the goddess, for instance, in his first speech. And he rails through the play, and he is responsible for some of the drama in the play, but at the end he's reconciled with his brothers. And so, as against the fool, who was Lear's fool, who was pretty much a persona of Lear and dies at exactly the same time as Lear, Edmund in the play acts more as a vehicle for Shakespeare's philosophy. And if we go back to the idea of cross-dressing, which we mentioned that that Falstaff is cross-dressed as a witch, well, in 5 other plays, females cross-dress as males. And the idea there, of course, is that they temporarily take on the role of the male, effectively like a male god, for instance, and use that strategy to rectify some of the issues in the play. But at the end of the play, unlike the God of the Bible, of course, they take off the guise. The God of the Bible is nothing other than nature and drag. And so they take off the guise and just return to a normal life. And the other example would be in Measure for Measure, for instance, in which Vincentio gets to know Isabella, who's a novice nun. And in the process of talking to her, of dealing with her issues, and dealing with Angelo, the very idealistic lord who he puts in charge of the state while he is in absence, he gets to the point with Isabella where he's talking to her about this and that, and then she says something about truth. And at that moment, she has an epiphany. He has got her to the point of understanding the basics of the sonnet philosophy as applies to ideas. And from that moment on, they have a true form of love. They have an amazing form of love. So here's a character who's dissed by Harold Bloom, but in fact has the capacity to get into a female, in this case, take her away from unrealistic, idealized expectations, and turn into a wonderful partner.
That was a lot of evidence in a short amount of time, Roger. Quite overwhelming, but very impressive.
Well, it's just the beginning, really. And it's all these various facets and features of the plays, the whole arrangement of the plays in the folio, that's significant. It's not just a matter of going back to the original and attempting to read the Elizabethan text. If you don't approach them with the sonnet philosophy, if you haven't uploaded the criteria and the issues and the background for the sonnet philosophy, then it's going to be particularly difficult to actually see these things, that they just won't jump off at the page at you. And so going back to the 1623 folio is one thing, but continuing to learn, to understand, to explore, which is not necessarily easy, but to continue in that process. And so, for instance, we published the global philosophy, Shakespeare's global philosophy, a number of years ago. And that's attempted a summary of some of these issues. And so, to think of it in those terms, to think of this as a global philosophy, this is not a global religion, it's just a global understanding. It's our basic understanding made clear for us or put on paper for us by Shakespeare. Yeah, so the other way of approaching this, of course, is to go to the Coturnia Institute website, where most of this material, all the 924 pages of the sonnet commentary, or the play commentary, are available online. So we would encourage you to continue reading and continue attempting to understand.